Well, good morning. We're glad to have you with us today for our Sunday school in the sanctuary this week. And as we get started today, just a reminder to the Sunday school class secretaries or record keepers, Terry's class and the Alpha class, your envelopes are up here. If you have an offering that you plan to give during Sunday school, you can give it to the person you normally hand your offering to during Sunday school, and they'll get it turned in. And to those Sunday school class secretaries, just a reminder to put your envelopes at the back banister where Ken Hamby is standing right now, so that our Sunday school directors can come and get that. For those of you that have a particular Sunday school material that is provided through the church for your class, Eddie Stevens mentioned before Sunday school that your Sunday school material is in your classes for the next quarter. So if you need to get it this Sunday or next Sunday, you can get that before church, and just stop by your Sunday school class and your material will be in that class. And so in your classroom, I guess I should say. So be on the lookout for that if you need that. So today's teacher for Sunday school in the sanctuary is my cousin Darrell. And yeah, y'all got that, didn't you? Actually, we are related, about fifth cousins down the line or something like that. But nevertheless, Darrell Wilson is our Sunday school teacher for the day. And so, Darrell, I'm going to ask you the same questions that we ask each of our teachers. And the first one is, how long have you been attending Oak Ridge Baptist Church?
A little over 23 years.
Okay, 23 years here at Oak Ridge. And how long have you been teaching Bible studies, Sunday school classes of the sort?
Probably over 20 years.
Okay, so over 20 years as a Sunday school teacher. And the final question is, what sets your class apart from the other Sunday school class?
Well, our class, they like to drink coffee, a lot of them. We like to have dessert on occasion for breakfast. But what really, our class, we like digging into the Word a lot. We have more conversation than we do like me just stand up there and teach, and I ask a lot of questions, and they have a lot of good answers. And I think it's a whole lot interactive. It's what makes our class different.
All right. Well, Darrell, we appreciate you teaching for us today, so I'm going to turn it over to you and let you get started with our Bible study.
Thank you. This lesson kind of builds on what Rob talked about last week when he was talking about being holy. And this comes out of Leviticus 26, verses 1 through 13. And it's called Holy Living. Now, I'm going to show you the picture up here, and I'll ask you. Go ahead to the next slide. What are these? Suggestion signs. You know, at East Burke, the red one always meant spin tires on pavement. But the question I have to ask you about these, what's their primary purpose? What's the purpose of a traffic sign? Protect. State law, would it be a warning? Would you think there'd be a warning to some of these signs? Are some of them easier to ignore than others? What happens if you ignore some of these, like a railroad crossing, or what if you ignore a stop sign? What usually happens? Nothing good ever comes out of ignoring a stop sign, unless you live in Burke County. But what happens if you ignore these signs? Anybody ever seen a blue light behind you? I actually got pulled one time pulling into our driveway, actually into our road. But, you know, if you ignore a sign, sometimes you get caught, and there's repercussions to that. But as we get into this, I was going to kind of set a background for chapter 26. If you look at Leviticus 25, 26, and 27, 25 talks about instructions, which if you think about traffic signs, they're instructions. Some of them are instructions, but things like keeping the Sabbath, observing Jubilee, and relating to the poor were part of his instructions. And chapter 26, which is what we're going to look at tonight, was about exhortations and warnings about keeping God's covenant faithfully. And then chapter 27 was just laws related to vows and other final matters. So as we look at these, you'll see that most of these are, that we're going to look in 26, are number one, what God expected of his people, and number two, what they could expect in return for their faithfulness. He was wanting the people to live a holy life and be faithful. So in the first section here, it talks about faithfulness, and I'll read this to you. It says, "You shall not make idols for yourselves, neither a carved image nor a sacred pillar shall you rear up for yourselves, nor shall you set up an engraved stone in your land to bow down to it, for I am the Lord your God. You shall keep my Sabbath and reverence my sanctuary. I am the Lord." Now let me ask you something. When the Lord says you shall do something, is that a suggestion, or is it just a good idea, or what is it? It's a command, isn't it? He says you shall. It's not like you might or you oughta. You oughta if you grew up like I did, if you oughta. But, you shall meant really you shall do this. Otherwise, there could be repercussions if you don't do this. So if you look at that, if you look at those three things, he gave three things he told Israel to do. And number one is he says, you shall not. Now, if he says you shall not do something, should you do it? But look what he says here. You shall not make idols for yourselves. You shall not build carved images or sacred pillars to worship. Shall not set up an engraved stone to bow down to. You know, if you think about that, and you think about Israel, I was thinking about this again this morning. If you think about Israel, they'd been in bondage in Egypt for several generations. And, they didn't really have formal instruction about what they should and shouldn't do to be faithful to the Lord. So what he did here, he's setting down these rules. He's telling them, this is what you shall do, or this is what you shall not do. The reason he had to tell them he shall not do this is because that's what everybody was doing in Egypt. So he's telling them that's not what you're supposed to do. He says you shall not. You shall not do this, this, and this. And then the question becomes, and you can hear these guys asking, well, why not? And he says, I am the Lord your God. That's why not. When you think about him telling them that, he says, I am the Lord your God. What does it mean to be Lord? Master? If he tells you he's the Lord, your God, that means you need to be obeying him, right? If he says don't do something, he means don't do something. But he also had a set of things they should do. And he says, you shall keep my Sabbaths and reverence my sanctuary. That shouldn't be too hard to follow his instructions here. But why don't people follow them better? But he told them, you should keep my Sabbath and reverence my sanctuary. He's telling them how to worship. Number one, he said, don't worship idols. Number two, he says, do worship me. And the question again, he repeats this again in these same verses. He says, well, why? He says, why? I am the Lord. That's why. It's a good reason, isn't it? Is it a good reason to be worshiping the Lord because he is the Lord? Pretty much. Let me tell you a story about that, Terry. When I first started working in a cotton mill, I was sweeping the floors for my uncle on second shift. And I would remember him calling his supervisors or his people in there. He was the plant manager. He called the people in there. And he says, you know why you're going to do it this way? Because I am the boss. When your kids ask you, why are you going to do it that way, what do you tell them? Because you said so. You think that's what the Lord's saying? Because I said so? That's a good reason. I mean, if the Lord tells you to do something, you ought to be doing it. There's another question here I wanted to ask you. How does the way we worship, in other words, we're supposed to worship the Lord and not worship idols. We're supposed to devote our whole heart to him when we're in worship. But how does the way we worship affect other ways, other areas of our relationship with him? Should the way we worship draw us closer to him? Worship's not supposed to be a routine, is it? It's supposed to be an intimate relationship with God. It's supposed to be drawing ourselves closer to Him. But how does that affect our relationship? I've had people in business life I had one guy that was high up in his church on Sunday, but on Monday he was willing to come in and cuss everybody out. Is that how we're supposed to worship the Lord? If we worship on Sunday, if we're high up in the church, or if we're active in the church, but yet on Monday morning we go in and cuss our coworkers out, is that the way we're supposed to act? What does it say about a relationship with the Lord if we do things like that? If we're really drawing closer to the Lord, we ought to be able to show it no matter who we're with, right? We always say we want to be a shining light for Him. Well, if we're doing that and we go to work and we're not doing what we're supposed to be doing, or our relationships should show in that we're supposed to be different, right? But if we go into work, or we go into visit somebody, or if somebody sees us out on the town somewhere and we're not acting like a Christian, what does that say about our relationship with the Lord? The next section of this talks about blessings. This is verses 3 through 8. He says, "If you walk in my statutes and keep my commandments and perform them, then I will give you rain in its season, the land shall yield its produce, and the trees of the field shall yield their fruit. Your threshing shall last till the time of vintage, and the vintage shall last till the time of sowing. You shall eat your bread to the full and dwell in your land safely. I will give peace in this land, and you shall lie down, and none will make you afraid. I will rid the land of evil beasts, and the sword will not go through your land. You will chase your enemies, and they shall fall by the sword before you. 5 of you shall chase 100, and 100 of you shall put 10,000 to flight." He said 2 things in these verses. Number 1, he says, if you do something, he said, if you do these 3 things, walk in my statutes, keep my commandments, and perform them. Now, what's too hard about that? I always ask us is to follow Him. Walk in His statutes. What does it mean to walk in His statutes? Obey Him, right? Keeping my commandments. Like we said, a commandment's not a suggestion either, is it? A commandment's a commandment. And perform them. What does it mean if you're going to keep His commandments? What's the difference between keeping the commandments and performing them? You're living it out, right? If you're keeping them, it's one thing, but if you're doing it, that's totally different. That's totally on top of that, basically. But that's what He's asking, not only keep your commandments, but perform them, live them out every day, is what He's saying. Now, why do you want to do that? The people, if they obey the Lord, do they get blessed? Huh? He says, if you do this, then I will do this. The second part is, then I will. Look what He's going to do for them. I will give you rain in its season. The land shall yield its produce. The trees of the field shall yield their fruit. Your threshing shall last till the time of vintage. The vintage shall last till the time of sowing. You shall eat your bread to the full. You shall dwell in your land safely. That's some pretty good blessings, ain't it? But is that all? But if you think about it, He only asked them to do 3 things, and look how many blessings they're getting. This is not all of them. There's the second page we'll go over. But can you ever outdo the Lord? All He's asking is for our faithfulness. And if we're faithful, then He's going to bless us more than we can ever be blessed. The second page of these, he goes right into this. The second page says, I will give you peace in the land. You shall lie down, and none will make you afraid. I will rid the land of evil beasts. The sword will not go through your land. You will chase your enemies, and they shall fall by the sword before you. Not you too, like I said there. I talked about my typist. I won't tell you who he was. 5 of you shall chase 100, and 100 of you shall put 10,000 to flight. Your enemies shall fall by the sword before you. So all he was asking them to do was those 3 things. And because of those 3 things, look at all these blessings they got. Again, I ask you, can you ever outdo the Lord? If you're faithful to Him, then He's going to bless you. And that's why He was telling the people of Israel. If you're faithful, then you get these blessings. Now, what happens if they're not faithful? Israel is one of those groups, they'd be faithful a while and they'd fall away. And they were faithful for a while and fall away. What happened when they weren't faithful? They weren't getting blessed, right? So if you look at that and you look at that, the fact He asked them to do 3 simple things, and then because of those 3 simple things, He gave them all these blessings. I think there's about 15 of them listed here, and that's just part of them. But you think about all the blessings they got simply for obeying Him. And that's all He really asks is for us to obey Him. There's another good question that was in the lesson. It says, how do we ensure that we are worshiping God for who He is instead of just seeking His blessings? You know, a lot of times I have to watch myself, because when as I'm saying prayer, I'll ask Him to bless this or bless that. But you got to stop and stand back and think about who God is. So the question becomes, how do you worship God for who He is instead of just seeking His blessings? I mean, He just told us twice in these verses so far. He says, I am the Lord, and I am the Lord your God. Isn't that enough to be worshiping Him for, because He is the Lord our God? How would you answer that question, I guess is what I'm asking. How do we make sure that what we're worshiping Him for who He is? We're not a patient people, are we? We have to wait. And you know, that's what we've got to remember, is who He is. He created everything, and He is worthy of praise no matter if we get blessings immediately or not, isn't He? But because we do acknowledge that He's our Lord, and if we keep His commandments, and if we do the things He's asked us to do, the blessings will come. How many of y'all have ever been under-blessed by the Lord? How many of you have not been blessed by the Lord? I mean, if you think about your life, He's blessed us all beyond measure, beyond what we ever could have expected. You know, when I was a kid, I didn't think much about stuff like that. And I sure didn't think I'd be standing up here in front of a crowd talking about the Lord, but He's blessed us in so many different ways. You know, just my life, if I look at my life the way He's blessed me, it's amazing the things He's done for an old guy that used to sweep the floor in a cotton mill. And, you know, you can't, if you try to number your blessings, you can't number them. They're far beyond number. He's blessed you in so many ways. He blesses you every day you get up. I guess every new day is a new blessing. And, you know, that's what we need to remember, is we're worshiping for who He is. Because He's there and He's worthy of our worship and praise, just like the song says. But the reason He's worthy of is because of who He is. He says, I am the Lord your God. Therefore, He's worthy of worship. The next part He goes into is how He fellowships with us. It says, for I will look on you favorably and make you fruitful, multiply you, and confirm my covenant with you. You shall eat, there goes that shall word again. You shall eat the old harvest and clear out the old because of the new. I will set my tabernacle among you, and my soul shall not abhor you. I will walk among you and be your God, and you shall be my people. I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, that you should not be their slaves. I have broken the bands of your yoke and made you walk upright. He's reminding them there of several things, but first off, he's reminding them he wants to be fellowshipped with, that we're to fellowship with him. And, I found this slide interesting, too, when you think about the benefits of God's presence. What does it mean when God's with you? I think we can all attest to the fact we felt God's presence in this church for some time now, but what's the benefits of that? Look what he says here. He says, I will respect unto you. I'll have respect unto you, which means if he's respecting us, we don't have to worry about divine wrath. It says, I will make you fruitful, which it indicates intimacy with God. I will set my tabernacle among you, which means God's residing with the faithful. When he says, I'll set my tabernacle among you, a lot of people thought that meant that he was going to build the tabernacle, which he did. But not only that, but what he's saying is he's going to live with them. He was setting up a house to keep it with them. It don't matter if they got a tabernacle or not. He was going to be with them. He says, my soul will not abhor you, which means reject you, because if you're living the way God wants you to live and God's with you, then he's not going to reject you. That's what Jesus is doing for us, intervening us. We know that God's not going to reject us because we have Jesus in our heart. And he says, I will be your God, and you will be my people. You shall be my people. Now, if you look at that, and he asks another question, he says, why? Why do we want to do this? Why is he going to do all this for us? And of course, the answer is, I am the Lord your God. That's a pretty good reason, isn't it? There's another question here. It says, what role does God's presence play in experiencing his blessings? If God's with you, does it make the blessings that much better? What role does his presence play with you experiencing God's blessings? Peace. If you think about it, when things were going right with Israel, it's because God was with them. When things weren't going right with Israel, it's because they had fallen away from God. It didn't mean God wasn't with them. It just meant they weren't doing the things they were supposed to be doing. But if God is with you, his presence is with you, you're going to be blessed that much more. Think about the blessings we've seen in this church. Think about Sunday mornings when you see all these kids setting up here for children's church. Isn't that a blessing? If God wasn't with us, then we wouldn't be getting these blessings. Well, I think really the blessings come, like you say, if we draw closer to God, he's going to draw closer to us. I don't think so. At least not an earthly limit. Eventually the fellowship with God is the ultimate. When you go to heaven and you live with him forever, that's where and then there's no limit to that. But here on this earth, like you say, the closer you are to God, the more he's going to draw closer to you. We limit the blessings. That's true. But God doesn't. God, he asked Israel to simply do 3 things for him, and you saw those 2 pages of things he listed that he was going to bless them with. We can't list the blessings that we've had. There's no way that we can list the blessings that God has given us. Both individually and as a church, he just continues to bless our efforts, I think. But if God's drawing close to you, I think you've got to draw closer to him. He ends this up with reminding of the Israelites of who he is. He reminds them of how he's already blessed them. He says, he brought you forth out of the land of Egypt, that you shall not be bondsmen, broke the bands of your yoke, and made you go upright. let me ask you something. How's this parallel what he's done for us? He brought us forth out of the sin. He brought us forth out of a certain death. We're no longer a slave to sin because he broke the bonds of our sin. It made us go upright. You know, when you're beaten down with sin, as everybody's born into sin, but when you're beaten down with sin, it can be your master. And he's broke the band of that because we're following him. And he's telling them that he's already blessed them. Otherwise, they never would have left Egypt. He's already blessed them. But he's already blessed us too, hasn't he? That's really the end of my lesson. But well, anybody got any questions? Any comments?
You were talking about the present. I think good about that is you're going through sickness, death. Present is a really big blessing. Because you're not being blessed every minute. Hard times come, it's present is a real blessing.
It gets you through those hard times, doesn't it? You know, we've all lost loved ones, and we've all lost, like I say, we've lost loved ones, and we've been through some hard times. But I think God's presence makes those hard times a whole lot easier than it could be without him.
I can't imagine people that don't have him during those times.
Yeah, I've always heard some of the saddest funerals are the ones that the people that don't have the Lord because they don't know where they're going. You know, really, when a godly person dies, their funeral's a time of celebration because we know where they're at. You know, like when my mother passed away, I couldn't imagine not knowing that she was present with the Lord because I knew where she was at. You know, and it comforted me to know that Mom was with the Lord because we knew where she was at. If she wasn't in God's presence, then there'd be a lot to be troubled about. Yeah. You know, that's a pretty good point, too, if you think about that. When things are hard, we seek him more. I mean, think about the Israelites. When things were going good, that's when they fell away from him. When they thought they were invincible, that's when they fell away from him. But when things got hard, such as being slavery in Egypt, it was their opportunity to draw closer to him. And then, you know, the whole Old Testament, they'd draw closer to him for a while, and then things would get good, and they'd fall away from him. You know, I would hope we're not the same way. We should strive to draw closer to him even when things are good. I mean, if you look around how good things are going in our church right now, the way he's blessed our church, this is when we ought to be seeking his presence even more, right? And, you know, that's what's really sad is when you see people like that, there is no hope for them because if they don't know the Lord, they don't have his hope. And, you know, when somebody dies like that, they don't know where they're going. Unfortunately, we feel like we don't know what's in their heart, but we know how they've lived. And it's scary to think about people like that. And that's why wanting us to tell everybody we can about Jesus, but not everybody's going to pick it up, you know. That's a blessing in itself, isn't it? Sure is. Yep. Mm-mm. Yep. Yep. Yeah, he knew what was going to happen before it came along, didn't he? You know, and that's the thing we need to understand is that he's got the best. He knows what the plan is. We don't, and he's going to bless us in ways that we need to be blessed, and he's going to keep us from doing things that we don't need to be doing. But you know, like I say, when he says "you shall," that's not a suggestion. It's a you better be doing it. But anyway, we're out of time, or we'll go ahead and adjourn. Thank y'all this morning. Thank you.